Hello everyone, and today we're going to be talking about Branded Buster Blader. So this is again a return to a strategy we haven't talked about in a little while. If we're on the topic of different ways of playing Buster Blader, this is probably going to be one of the strongest ways of doing so. It still has some of the same problems as other versions. It doesn't play very well against back row. But that's its main weakness, to be honest. Everything else about the deck, it basically takes the strengths of Branded and Despia, as again I'm sure we're all very aware. It's a deck that I've covered quite extensively, where you've got your Tragedy, Aliber, Branded Opening, your Fallen Valabaz fusions, and it combines them with the ultimate sort of control that will come alongside a Buster Blader deck. So ideally what you want to be able to do is utilize your Branded fusion in order to set up not only a Mirror Jade, but also your Buster Lock and an extra deck lock, utilizing this guy here. How it will generally work is you will activate your Branded fusion, you will send your Albaz and your Dragon Buster Destruction Sword from deck to graveyard, you will summon out your Lubellion, discard 1 to fusion summon again, shuffling itself and your Fallen of Albaz back into the deck to bring out your Mirror Jade. So there's your Mirror Jade, pretty standard, but now you've got this guy in grave. So long as you have a way to get into your prologue as well, you'll not only be able to have a Mirror Jade on the field, but you'll also be able to activate the prologue during your opponent's turn to summon out your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, your Buster Dragon, and use the Buster Dragon to equip onto your Buster Blader the Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, which will lock your opponent out of their extra deck. So that's pretty much the ideal situation. It is a 2-card combo. There's no 1-card way of making that happen, unfortunately. Which does lead to occasionally some consistency issues. That's why we're running things like Keeper of Dragon Magic. Kit as well, Spriggan's Kit is also another possibility for something you could run. The only reason I prefer Keeper is it's a dragon. So on the off chance this gets negated, destroyed, or whatever, it's still a dragon, which means that it fits the bill for fusion material off of our Destruction Sword memories, right? So that's why we prefer this guy. But ultimately, again, we're going to be... Oh, we come off the deck list. So we're going to be going into a few games where we're sort of winning some, we're losing some. It's very difficult to play this deck at the minute because of the state of the ranked ladder. Again, I've talked about this in a previous video. It's very difficult to get a decent evaluation as to how good or bad these decks are because everyone is either surrendering right away or they're playing really toxic decks. I think out of 8 matchups when I was initially building this, I think 7 of them were Runic and 1 of them was Branded. Runic, you're going to struggle against Runic with this deck, right? It got to the point where we were so convinced that we just struggled so heavily against that deck that we forewent the matchup completely. If you want to be able to beat them better, you're going to want to include things like Cosmic Cyclone. Other than that, though, again, we're going to talk about that when we get into the gameplay. We're going to show off the deck, its strengths, its weaknesses, talk about the full deck list and profile at the end. So if you want a card for card, stick around until the end and we'll do that there. And if you get to there and you haven't yet subscribed or liked the video, why not? It doesn't cost you anything, it helps me out, helps you out, it's a win-win. And with that, let's get into game number 1. Alrighty, getting into game number 1, this is going to be a bit of a demonstration of almost like your ideal turn 1. So we're going to normal summon our Buster Whelp, which is going to search our deck for Prologue. So that means with Prologue and Branded Fusion in hand, you're set, you're good to go. So what we're going to do is activate our Branded Fusion, send from deck to graveyard the Fallen of Albaz and our Destruction Sword, bring out our Lubellion. Lubellion, discard 1 to fusion summon again, shuffling itself and an Albaz back to bring out Mirror Jade. So there's Mirror Jade, boss monster number 1. We set our prologue and pass to our opponent. Now during the draw phase, you want to flip this up, activate it to send from deck to graveyard your memories and your Buster Blader in order to fusion summon and synchro summon all in one chain, banishing memories. Memories banishes a dragon and Buster Blader. Now, on this occasion, we had another dragon in graveyard already. We had the Fallen of Albaz. If you don't have the Fallen of Albaz in grave or you don't have a dragon in grave at the time, what you would do during your initial turn is you would have activated Mirror Jade's effect to banish another monster in the field, to send Albion from deck to graveyard, set Branded in red, and then Albion would serve as your dragon banish. So you would always have materials. We just got lucky enough to have an extra dragon. So we fusion summon out our Buster Blader, Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, and we also synchro summon out our Buster Dragon. Then we equip onto our Blader the Dragon Buster Destruction Sword. So we've got total skill drain here with the Buster Dragon and the Buster Blader. It changes all their monsters to dragons. negates all their dragons and switches them all to defense. Mirror Jade has a banish on demand, and we have the Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, which locks our opponent out of using their extra deck, which is pretty amazing. They are going to MST negate our block here, which is fine, it is what it is. Summon out Manju, Manju gets switched to defense, negated, and Scoop City. Easy as that. So yeah, that's a pretty good demonstration of what the deck wants to do. Are you going to get that every single game? No, you're not, realistically. We try to get it as often as we possibly can. We have quite a lot of cards that ensure the deck is as consistent as possible. But even then, you're going to be able to do something like this, let's say 60, 65, 70% of the time. And the other 30 or 40% of the time, what you're doing is either utilizing your full Buster Lock, which is significant enough in and of itself, or you'll be using your full Branded Despia combo, which is, yet again, pretty significant in and of itself. So either one of these two engines by themselves are really good. But in a hand like this, where you're able to get both, you're set, you're laughing. Absolutely busted. Let's get into game number 2. Alright, getting into game 2 here, this is going to be a demonstration of some of the deck's weaknesses instead. We're going to go Buster Whelp here to grab our extra deck lock. We didn't really have anything worth searching, so we just grabbed this guy. Link off in the Linkuriboh, and there we have it, the full Buster Blader setup. All you need is Prologue on your field, and a Dragon in your grave. Job done. So we've got the full setup here. We go into in the draw phase, flip up Prologue, send memories, send Buster Blader, activate memories in grave to get fusion summoning, and this is our full setup. We would have liked to have the Destruction Sword in grave, but unfortunately, again, we just didn't have a way to pitch it. It is what it is. We're going to bring out our fusion and our synchro, then we're going to trap trick initially as well to grab ourselves an infinite impermanence on the off chance it becomes useful, and we're pretty much set up. They're going to go for that grass looks greater. We are, of course, going to hit that with the Ash Blossom. Very lucky Ash here. We did have Ghost Spell just in case they had Call by the Grave, so we were relatively safe in going for that play. They're going to summon Swap Frog, right? So it's Swap Frog set 3 into Card of Demise, followed by setting another 2. So we're playing against 5 back row cards here, which is very difficult for this deck to get past. This deck really heavily inhibits your opponent's abilities to play monsters. It doesn't as heavily inhibit your opponent's ability to play back row, right? So we're going to normal summon this guy out just so we can synchro summon into Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss. This is one of your best sort of anti-back row type cards. It can target and negate a card in the field. We're going to go Battle Phase, swing in. We get hit with the Mirror Force. We think not a chance. We're going to use Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, target the Mirror Force, and negate its effect. So we are absolutely safe. No way this can go wrong. Unless they've got 2. There you go. Mirror Force winning the day. Mirror Force destroys all of our attack position monsters. Very unfortunate. So we have no choice here. We're forced to skip into our next turn. We did utilize our normal summon to bring out our Abyss, which did not work out. But we have Alibra at least for some follow-up should that be necessary. They're going to swap their Frog back into their hand before going for Pot of Desires. They're going to activate Paleozoic Linshulia, which is very interesting. Brings back the Barrier statue from their Banish pile back into their graveyard. Now this targets a banished card, right? So there's an interesting interaction when it comes to cards being banished face down. If a card, there's a whole bunch of cards obviously that can target banished cards and whatever. If it says target one banished card, you can in fact target face down banished cards. It's only whenever the card stipulates that it has to be a banished monster or it has to be a banished such and such. If it just says card, it can target face down as well. So they're going to bring out Swap Frog. We're going to quickly hit that with the Impermanence. We should have done that at the beginning of the turn, but we didn't, so here we are. They're going to activate their Paleozoic Linshulia. I'm super interested in building a Paleozoic deck. This guy got me thinking big time. This deck is so cool. They're going to go for Trap Trick as well then. Trap Trick banishing a Super Team Buddy Force Unite to set one directly from their deck to the field. Now, of course, they do have the Barrier statue of the Torrent in the graveyard, so we can't really afford for this to resolve, so we are in fact going to use Ghost Bell. We expected him to use the Totally Awesome to negate it, but he actually doesn't. He allows the Ghost Bell to resolve. I guess he just wasn't all that worried about having the Barrier statue on field. So he's going to set 3 and pass it back to us. Jesus, an Omni Negate plus set 3. Realistically, what do you do here? It's a very difficult situation. He's going to detach a material, summon out a Dupe Frog from his deck, we decide, you know what, we're going to gamble here. If we were to have normal summoned Aliber, trying to activate its effect, we would have just been negated, guaranteed L, nothing we could do about it. We're going to just wait, pray, and hope that they can't do anything off of this play, but it looks like, again, with a totally awesome Ice Dragon's Prison and the Paleozoic cards in grave, as well as accumulated fortune, a Chain Link 4 or higher Pot of Greed. Absolutely crazy here off of this guy's deck. He's got way too much damage, stealing our Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, activating the Swap Frog here to pitch the Ronin Totem. He is going to combo off here, but you know what? I was curious about the deck, so I let him do it. He's going to go into his Exceed monster here, the Opabiana. Opabiana, detach material, search Paleozoic, and so long as this guy's face up, all of your Paleozoic cards can be used from your hand, which is pretty nuts. And all of your Paleozoic monsters, all of them have an individual effect where they're unaffected by other monsters' effects, right? So you can't hit them with monster effects, we can't Veiler this, we can't do nothing. It's completely unaffected. So he's going to summon out the Linchila here. Linchila then returning the Pika. Sorry, is that Morella? Morella. Returning Morella to the graveyard here. Ronin Totem then activating its effect, banishing the Dupe Frog to summon itself to field. He's going to send a set card to the graveyard to grab yet another Linchila. He's really abusing this card. None of these cards are once per turn, by the way. They're all pretty nuts. Marilla here coming back out to the field. Yet another level 2 water aqua monster. They're going to link off into the Boral Sword Dragon. Look at this absolute monster. They're going to banish from grave as well to go into yet another copy of Ronin Totem. Boral Sword. It would switch this guy to defense, right? But because they're unaffected by monster effects, it doesn't get switched to defense. But the Boral Sword still gets his double attack. So there you go. If someone's interested in playing frogs, Paleozoics, anything like that, hit your boy up. I'm actually super interested. Totally Awesome is getting banned, right? It's banned as hell. Sprite has ruined this card. I guess this guy is probably just trying to use it a little bit before it actually does get banned. I can relate to that. I'm trying to use Union Carrier as much as I can before it gets banned, so I can relate to that. But yes, fantastic plays from our opponent. Again, we just struggle with back row, right? That's just one of our biggest weaknesses is back row based strategies. There's no real way around that. But yeah, that's it for game number 2. Let's get into number 3. Already getting into game 3 here. We've got a pretty decent hand, but we are being forced to go second, which is a little bit unfortunate here. Our opponent's going to grab the Achiri from their deck. They normal summon it. We hit it with Veiler. I'll be perfectly honest. As soon as I see Adignisters, I sort of switch off, right? I picked my phone up. I loaded up a video on YouTube, and I was just going to let this guy cook, right? Because it's a little bit difficult to sort of do anything about it. The Ignister AI land then are going to use Fighting Spirit. Fighting Spirit revives the Achichi from the graveyard, link 2 into their Splash Mage. I guess we interrupted them enough where they couldn't go into their Cybers combo. They are going to bring back the Achichi, which will trigger off the Gichiri here, summoning itself out to the field, link off into Deco Tonker Heat Soul. Heat Soul, I believe, pay 1,000, draw an extra card, and then they went into Access Code Talker. So because we weren't paying attention, I actually do misplay here quite heavily. And we're going to see how in just a second. So they're going to boost themselves up to 53. Gichiri makes the Access Code Talker unaffected by card effects for the rest of until the end of the following turn, which is a big deal because in my little monkey brain, my smooth brain, I thought to myself, I'm just going to normal summon Albaz and fuse with it. I normal summon Albaz, Giambroki, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I looked at the graveyard, saw the Gichiri, and I kicked myself. It would have been much better to play Alibra here, of course. But you know what? It is what it is. Got to make the best of the situation. We crash into the Access Code Talkers just so we've got a Dragon Engrave set to pass it on. Our opponent's going to go Idol Reborn. I always forget you just pronounce the I here. Idol Reborn, bringing back Doyon then from their deck after summoning Achichi to the field. We're not in a terrible position. Now that we've got a Dragon Engrave, we can activate Prologue, send from deck to graveyard. They're going to maxi. That's whatever. We're going to chain our memories to the maxi so that he draws one less card off of it. And from here on out, we should be good to go. We are going to also monkey flip our Trap Trick here as well, just to set an imperm to the field so we can deal with that nasty little Access Code Talker. Otherwise, it having 5,300 attack points would be a problem. So we're going to banish to fusion summon into our Buster Blader, then our Prologue is going to bring out the Buster Dragon. Suddenly all of his monsters are dragons and cannot activate their effects. He tries to swing in here. We're going to immediately flip the Imperm, reduce his attack points back down to 2300, and he's no longer big enough to get over to the Buster Dragon. He's simply going to T-set and pass back to us here, which isn't going to bode very well for him. Redraw into the Branded Opening. We activate Branded Opening. It does get hit with the Ash Blossom, which is fine. We were sort of up in the air as to whether or not we wanted to commit to the Aliber normal summon or not. But getting the Branded Opening ashed is better than getting Aliber ashed, and our opponent knows that. They immediately scoop it up. They know exactly what we're about to do to them, and they don't want any part in it. So there you go, easy win there, utilizing what is essentially just the Buster Blader engine by itself, right? Because there are certain decks and strategies that this will completely and utterly shut down. Agnesers is one of them. Most very monster heavy combo centric decks would find themselves in a similar situation, so they would even the likes of Mathmech would completely crumble to a strategy like this unless they had some form of other removal, because they can't activate the effect of things like Loblation, because it's a continuous effect. They can't like diameter negate a continuous effect. It doesn't work like that. But yeah, very good plays there on both sides. Our opponent did try their best through the minimal interruption we did give them. Let's get into game number 4. Already getting into our 4th and final game here. We have an okay hand. We don't like seeing Fallen of Albaz in hand. We don't like seeing Buster Blader in hand, right? So these aren't fantastic cards to have. The Imperm, Branded Fusion, and Veiler, though, are all very good cards to have. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. We're going to go Imperm here off the bat against this Lubellion. Probably should have activated Veiler instead, but it is what it is. We're going to negate that Lubellion, stop it from going off. And the Tragedy is going to grab him an Aliber from his deck, which he is now consequently going to normal summon, but we are going to use our Veiler on the Aliber, so all is well that ends well. Our opponent doesn't get to do any sort of fancy fusion shenanigans, and they are forced to simply pass turn to us. But the 2 back row, very scary whenever you consider the fact that they're playing Branded. So we know that one of those cards are going to be Branded in red or Branded Banishment, and sure enough, they flip up the Branded Banishment. That puts us in a very awkward situation because they now get to utilize our Fallen of Albaz in their fusion summon. They are, of course, just going to bring out their Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. They're going to double up on the Searing Dragon here, activating Tragedy, activating Lubellion to ditch the Dramaturge from hand to fusion summon yet again. They're going to shuffle back into their deck to bring out their Mirror Jade. So they ended up just stealing our monster to bring out their Mirror Jade. They're going to add to their hand Aliber the Jester or Despia for some follow-up. We're going to activate Branded Fusion, send 2 for Albion the Branded Dragon. We couldn't really afford Lubellion. That discard cost was way too heavy a cost. We're going to banish 2 to fusion summon into Titaniclad the Ash Dragon. We need rid of that Mirror Jade and we can't afford him destroying us in the meantime. Titaniclad is going to swing in the Mirror Jade. He's going to banish us off of the Mirror Jade, banish Albion, and then he's going to droplet our Titaniclad. So Titaniclad, unfortunately, is beaten by the Mirror Jade. We're going to set Trap Trick, and we're going to pass to our opponent here, hoping for the best. We still have a chance. Where there is a trick, there is a way. So we're going to activate Trap Trick during the draw phase, setting Prologue straight to the field from the deck, which we will immediately flip face up. Prologue sending Buster Blader and Memories to grave, which will then chain the Memories to. Memories then allowing us to fusion summon from the graveyard into our Buster Blader. Prologue bringing out our Buster Dragon. So this is the power of Buster Blader, where it's as long as you have Prologue, it is an incredible follow-up, switching all of his monsters to defense, but he's got the super polymerization, fusing away our Buster Dragon into his Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. Of course, it is switched to defense by our Buster Blader, but he has Branded in red to take full advantage of the situation, adding back the Ad Libitum to his hand, fusing 3 off into the Guardian Chimera. Guardian Chimera, of course, being in no way limited by or restricted. It cannot activate its effect because 2 monsters were used on field to fusion summon it, and we don't have 2 cards. So it can't use its effect, but he is able to Mirror Jade, banish our Buster Blader, swing in for 3k. He can't attack directly with the Guardian Chimera, but at this stage it's almost not going to matter. We are going to need to rely on a very powerful top deck card here if we want to stay in the game, and unfortunately we draw into Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, so we had absolutely zero way to come back from this game. Very well played from our opponent. The Branded Banishment at the beginning, as well as Super Poly, he fused using more of our monsters than he did his own. But it is what it is, you know. Sometimes they just have the out, and that's just it. Sometimes you lose. So yeah, good plays on both sides. Let's get into the deck profile. Now, I get asked quite a lot whether or not Buster Blader is still actually good or worth using, right? And the answer to that question varies massively depending on the state of the meta, right? Because Buster Blader is one of those anti-meta decks, okay? It's a rogue deck that is useful in certain metagames, and the ones it's most useful in are of course those filled with monster heavy combo based strategies that rely very heavily upon having a field full of powerful monsters, which, you know, is a few decks at the minute. For a while there it was completely useless, you know, with Runic and Labyrinth and Eldritch running around like crazy. This deck was awful, right? But now that we're in a meta where a lot more monsters and a lot more decks are being played, Sword Soul and Mathmech, for example, being tier 1, Branded Despot being tier 2, this deck plays very well against those, right? So it does have a little bit more relevance now than it has in the past. Is this the best way of building it? Again, I'm not entirely sure. It's very difficult to get a solid reading on how good or bad the deck is or the builds are because of the state of the ladder at the minute, so we are likely going to revisit this in the new ranked season whenever that drops. In fact, it probably already has dropped by the time you're seeing this, so I'm likely already testing this in the new season. What we're going to do first is strip out the hand traps so we can get a better look at what we're actually dealing with. We've got the double Veiler, the double Max C, the double Ash Blossom, the double Ghost Bell, the 2 Called by the Grave, the 2 Infinite Impermanence. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of running 2 of many of these cards, purely because I don't like drawing 3 ofs when it comes to like hard ones per turns, like Ash Blossom and Ghost Bell and Max C. Plus, Max C is a situational card. It is absolutely broken against some or most decks. It is absolutely useless and horrendous against others. So I like playing most of my hard ones per turns at 2. Veiler and Imperm, I wouldn't play 3 ofs in this deck because you're already negating all monsters on the field. So they're not like super necessary. They're only really there for when you're being forced to go second. So yeah, I think that sort of ratio of hand traps and interruptions and such is absolutely fine. The Cult by the Grave is purely to make sure things like your Branded Fusion resolve and your Prologue resolve, because these cards are in fact ashable. Well, sorry, the Prologue isn't ashable, but it is capable of being hit with Ghost Bell, unfortunately. So yeah, what we're going to do then is separate this into 2 different halves. You know what, I'm actually going to count Keeper as flex spots. Double Keeper, we were playing this just as an extra search for Branded Fusion, but this, you can cut it. It's really not that good. So we can cut that out for now. So this is actually the core of your deck, right? And it's separated into 2 halves, Buster Blader and Branded, of course. We're going to talk about Buster Blader first, and it all centers around the trap card Prologue of the Destruction Swordsman. This is where the magic happens, so it is. So Prologue is essentially your 1-card combo to get into all of your Buster Blader plays. You will activate it, you will send a Destruction Sword card and a Buster Blader monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then you will summon out the Buster Dragon straight from your extra deck or graveyard if you have one in your graveyard that was properly summoned. So Prologue is where it all gets started. What cards are you going to be sending to the graveyard off of that? Well, you're going to be sending your Destruction Sword Memories, a trap card here which you can banish from your graveyard in order to fusion summon into Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, by banishing materials from your graveyard. So Prologue will send Memories and Buster Blader, so the only thing you need now is a dragon. What are we playing? We're playing dragons. Branded, that's the whole point. That's the biggest point of synergy. So the Branded engine helps you complete that little combo. In order to make it more consistent, we are of course playing Buster Whelp of the Destruction Swordsman, which is a dragon and meets that requirement, as well as being able to search for Prologue upon being normal summoned. So basically it searches for Prologue and it's a dragon, so this is like a 1-card way of going into all your Buster Blader plays, but Prologue, of course, it's basically just here to search Prologue. And Trap Trick is just part of this engine. Trap Trick, banish a normal trap from deck to set another normal trap with the same name to your field, so you're going to banish Prologue to set Prologue, and yet again, that is your full play. So if you have Prologue, or Trap Trick, or Buster Whelp, then you have your full play, so long as you're able to put a dragon in grave. And to do so, we're going to be utilizing the Branded engine. To cover off, just quickly cover off the rest of the Buster Blader cards. We're running 2 of this guy. He's just here for his name to be sent to the graveyard off of Prologue. That's it. You're very rarely going to actually use the card, but he's just here for his name, basically. The Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, you're going to play this card as part of your main combo to lock your opponent out of using their extra deck. So whenever I'm building a deck, especially a mix upon something like Branded, I always like to look at the deck and think to myself, what does this deck do that Branded Despia doesn't, right? How does this separate itself from what Branded Despia does? Is it just a worse version, or is it a side grade? Is it an upgrade? What's the plan? What's the situation? And the side grade for this deck, what sets this one apart from the regular Branded Despia strategy, is not only the ability to lock down and skill drain your opponent, but also the ability as part of your core combo to set up an extra deck lock. That's what makes this version of it separate from both Branded Despia, as well as separate from other Buster Blader decks that we would play. The Buster Blader decks we would normally play don't set this up very consistently, whereas this deck is built upon the basis of doing so. So that's what makes this pretty unique, and I absolutely love that. Getting into the Branded Despia cards before we talk about the combos, we've got Despian Tragedy and Despian Ad Libitum of Despia at 1 each. Despian Tragedy, when sent to the graveyard or banished by a card effect, will search your deck for a Despia monster. It can also banish itself from graveyard to reset one of your branded spells and traps. Pretty useful card. Ad Libitum, when used as fusion material either in your hand or on your field, it is going to resummon either a Despia monster or a level 8 or higher fusion monster that is banished or in your graveyard. Remember, it cannot summon Buster Blader the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman because this card must be fusion summoned. Even if you summoned it correctly to begin with and it got destroyed, Ad Libitum cannot revive it. So this is purely here to revive the likes of your Mirror Jade, to revive the likes of your Alibur if you want to get follow-up. So yeah, Despia, Ad Libitum with Despia is not as strong in this deck as he would be in regular Despia decks, but he's still more than powerful enough to play at 1. Then we've got, of course, the 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz, purely here for its name. We just need to be playing the Fallen of Albaz. I'm very tempted to cut this down to 1 because I draw it so often, and it just feels like a brick, right? It's not a very good card to draw. Having 2 of it in your deck ensures you're going to be able to continually loop your Lubellions and Branded Fusions. So there is, of course, a reason to play 2. I would be super tempted to cut it down to 1, I'm not going to lie. We've got Alibur the Jester of Despia, which on summon will search your deck for a branded spell or trap card. That's going to be an extra 2 copies of Branded Fusion. It also has another lesser used effect where if a fusion monster on your field is destroyed, this guy can target a monster your opponent controls, negate that monster's effects for the turn, and then resummon himself to the field. So he's a useful searcher as well as being some like battle phase protection if needed, and some negation control. So yeah, Alibur is absolutely a very powerful card. Play that at 2, 100%. Branded Fusion is the central card of the Branded strategy, of course, and plays very heavily into the regular Buster Blader strategy as well, where you're going to fusion summon them by sending monsters from deck to graveyard to bring out any of your Fallen of Albaz dragons. So you're usually going to summon Lobelion the Searing Dragon by sending a Dark Monster and your Fallen of Albaz to the graveyard, like your Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, to get all of your plays going. So this card is definitely one of the most powerful cards in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the moment, rather than just even this deck. This card is crazy, and it will enable virtually all of your plays. Even just by itself, if you don't open any of your Buster Blader cards, this card by itself is going to set you up a pretty decent board. Then we've got Branded Opening. Discard a card to special summon a Despia monster from your deck or add it to your hand, but you're almost always going to be using it to special summon Alibur the Jester of Despia straight out from the deck. So Branded Opening is just an extra 2 copies of Branded Fusion, baby. It can also banish itself from the graveyard to protect one of your fusion monsters from destruction, so that is quite handy when it comes to protecting your Dragon Destroyer Swordsman on occasion. So that does come up. And lastly then, we have Branded in Red. One of your main follow-up cards, you will target a Despia monster or a Fallen of Albaz in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and then you will conduct a fusion summon, summoning a level 8 or higher fusion monster from your field and hand. Because it's a quick play spell, you'll normally be doing this during your opponent's turn to bring out the likes of Guardian Chimera to put up some massive interruption on your opponent's turn, which is absolutely phenomenal. Very easily searched as part of your primary combo as well, so Branded in Red, absolutely mandatory. You could make an argument for Branded Banishment. I was initially playing Branded Banishment. Where is it? So the reason I'm not playing it is purely the fact that it can't resummon this guy. It can't resummon the Buster Blader, so I feel like that will very heavily limit how much you're going to be able to use this card realistically if you just open it up. And I feel like we're not in a position where we need multiple search targets off of the likes of Albion. yeah, I just feel like it was unnecessary. I was seeing it when I didn't want to see it, and even when it was in the deck and I wasn't opening it up at bad times, I was almost never searching for it. I was almost always grabbing Branded in red instead, so I think Branded Banishment is just a little bit too bricky for this deck. But you could, of course, put it in there. I know a lot of people would swear by this card. I'm a huge fan of it, absolutely. I just think it's not the greatest in this particular deck. So that covers it for the main deck. So it does, again, the two parts, they sort of intertwine, just trying to fill your graveyard very quickly with at least a dragon and setting up your Fusion Prologue combo. Getting into the extra deck is where it gets spicy here for anyone who hasn't seen these cards before. You're either new to the channel or new to the game of Master Duel, because these things have been everywhere. We're going to start off with our Buster Blader cards, the Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, and the Buster Dragon. These two cards go hand in hand. The Fusion Monster will switch all of your opponent's Dragon type monsters to defense and prevents them from activating their effects. He also gains 1000 attack and defense for each one and deals piercing damage when he attacks, so he gets huge, negates all of your opponent's monsters and switches them to defense. But I hear you say, you know, it only affects dragons. Well, this is where the Buster Dragon comes in. While this card is face up, all of your opponent's monsters become dragons. So this guy changes everything to dragon, and this guy negates all their dragons. It's that simple. There is one other little effect for the Buster Dragon you'll utilize quite a lot. If you control a Buster Blader monster, you can target a Destruction Sword monster in your graveyard and equip it onto it. So what you will do is you will equip onto your Fusion monster the Dragon Buster Destruction Sword from your graveyard that you sent there using Branded Fusion. You know, it's gonna be there. You're gonna equip it on to this guy, and so long as your Dragon Buster Destruction Sword is face up, your opponent is locked out of their extra deck, which is absolutely massive. So you're setting up a sort of field-wide Omni Negate that can't activate any of their effects, any of their monster effects, sorry, not Omni Monster. Preventing them from using any monster effects and locking them out of the extra deck, as well as having a big branded card on field as well. So these two, absolutely amazing. Getting into the branded Despia Fusion, so we're going to just quickly rattle through these. We've got Titaniclad, which is here as an unaffected boss monster on occasion when you need a huge ass beater. We've got Albion, which is almost always going to be sent to the graveyard off of the effect of Mirror Jade, so it can search one of your branded spells and traps during the end phase. We've got Quiritis, which is going to be a fusion between any Despia monster and a light or a dark monster. On occasion it's useful alongside something like Branded in Red in order to reduce the attack points of all monsters that aren't level 8 or higher fusions to 0, which will help protect the likes of Buster Dragon or your Buster Blader from huge beaters. You've got Mirror Jade, which is the big bad of this deck, and it was the big bad of the meta for quite a long time. Once every 2 turns, you can send a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material from your extra deck to the graveyard, like Albion, and you will non-targeting banish a monster on the field, which is absolutely busted. Then during the end phase of the turn in which it was destroyed or removed from the field by your opponent's card, you will destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So you're going to be sending the likes of Albion from extra deck to grave in order to activate its banishment effect. Then Albion's going to be setting something like Branded in Red to your field as follow-up. So Mirror Jade, phenomenal card, of course it is. We've got the double Lubellion the Searing Dragon, which on summon, you'll discard a card to conduct a secondary fusion summon, shuffling monsters from your field, graveyard and banished pile back into your deck as materials. So this guy is basically just here to extend into the likes of Mirror Jade. Then you've got Alba Lunatus, the Abyss Dragon. Alba Lunatus, whenever it's sort of similar to Albion the Branded Dragon, whenever you send it to the graveyard during the end of the turn, it's going to grab you a Polymerization or Fusion normal spell. It's basically just searching Branded Fusion to give you some follow-up. We very rarely utilize this card. If you don't have it and you want to spare yourself the UR credits, it's absolutely not needed. I don't think I've ever really resolved its effect in this deck. I very rarely use the card full stop, to be perfectly honest. It's only really here because it's also a phenomenal counter to the likes of Dragon Link. So if you normal summon a Fallen of Albaz, this guy can be contact fused to the field by sending Fallen of Albaz and any number of dragons anywhere on the field to the graveyard. So it holds a lot of synergy with this deck, because if you can use your Buster Dragon to switch everything on the field to dragons, then you can simply normal summon the Fallen of Albaz and fuse the Fallen of Albaz with all of your opponent's monsters. And then you've got an Alba Lunatus on the field, and your opponent's got absolutely nothing, with no chain link activation, no negation, no nothing. You're just wiping out the whole field. So that's why we're playing at least one of it. I feel like it's a pretty fun gimmick. It doesn't come up very often, but when it comes up, it's pretty funny, right? And then lastly, for our fusion monsters, we've got the Guardian Chimera. Must be used fusion summoned using 3 different monsters. You're going to use at least 1 material in hand and at least 1 material on field. For every material in hand used, you're going to draw a card on summon. For every material on the field used, you're going to pop a card when summoned. So ideally, you're going to be using Branded in red to summon this during your opponent's turn. You're going to be popping 1 or 2 of their cards. You're going to be drawing 1 or 2 cards, granting yourself a lot of interruption as well as follow-up and draw power. So absolutely mandatory to play at least 1. This card is amazing. Getting in the synchros, we've already talked about the Buster Dragon. So next up is the Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, which is purely here to help a little bit against back row strategies. It can be very easily summoned. So something that I maybe glossed over earlier on with the prologue is that the turn after your Buster Dragon is summoned off of this card, at the end of that turn, your Buster Dragon is destroyed, right? So it doesn't stick around forever. So what needs to happen is you're basically going to need to use it or lose it, right? And the Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss is a really good way of using it, because you can tune your Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, which you can special summon from your spell or trap card zone out to the field, as a level 1 tuner, plus your level 8 Dark Dragon non-tuner, to bring out your Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, what will give you a very powerful monster in exchange for the Buster Dragon, which would otherwise have been destroyed anyways. So it's a very good way of utilizing it, while giving you a little bit of extra negation, a little bit of control, plus being 3200 attack is pretty big. He's a very difficult card to get rid of in a lot of occasions. So a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, really solid card, especially against the likes of Sword Soul Supreme Sovereign Qing Ying. The Qing Ying is one of the biggest reasons I played this card, right? Because this card absolutely slaps him, able to negate him, stop his banishment, stop his attack, boosting and reduction, as well as simply punch him in the face, right? 3200 attack. This guy is bigger. So absolutely. And then last 2 cards are just engine cards. We've got Linkuriboh, which you will need to basically summon by sending Buster Welt to the graveyard. He's purely here to put this guy in grave whenever you normal summon it, which means you have a dragon in grave for your prologue plays. And then Predaplant Verte Anaconda, on the off chance you need it to go into an emergency Mirror Jade, right? Which again isn't going to happen very often. What you do need to remember though is on the turn you activate Branded Fusion, you cannot special summon from your extra deck except fusion monsters. That is both before and after, so if you're going to be planning on using Branded Fusion, you will not be linking Buster Whelp into Linkuriboh. You need to remember you're going to need to put the dragon in grave some other way, probably by banishing the Whelp using Mirror Jade's effect to put Albion in grave instead. But there are plenty of workarounds, just make sure you don't link summon on the turn you intend to use Branded Fusion. And yeah, that is pretty much everything. The deck really isn't all that complicated. You want to be seeing Branded Fusion, Prologue in hand. They both play as separate engines, so you're not going to need to learn loads of like intricate combos or anything like that. They play almost entirely separately, but they overlap in the resources needed for their execution, right? Which is a really solid point of synergy. When the point of synergy between your 2 decks is the resources needed to make one engine work versus the other, and when those resources overlap, so you're achieving both objectives at the same time, that's a really powerful mix, right? And I feel like this is definitely one of the best ways of playing Buster Blader. Going into the new ranked season, I think it will continue to be one of the best ways of playing it, because the sheer power of the likes of Mirror Jade, alongside the consistency of setting up your extra deck lock, it's simply a lot. It's too much to pass up, right? It's simply the best way of playing the deck. So yeah, that is pretty much everything. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about different builds, ideas, anything at all you want to throw my way, absolutely you can do so in the comments or by joining a Discord server. And if you've watched this far into the video and you haven't liked the video or subscribed yet, then what are you doing? You may as well subscribe if you've come this far. Obviously you like what you're seeing, and I like having you around, so stick around. And with that, I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.